The old writer, Silas Blackwood, lived in a ramshackle cottage perched precariously on a cliff overlooking the churning grey sea. His hair was the color of sea foam, his face a road map of wrinkles etched by time and countless cigarettes, and his eyes, though faded, held a spark of something akin to mischief. He was a recluse, a whisper in the literary world, a name that once held promise but had faded into obscurity. He hadn't published anything of note in decades, yet whispers persisted, whispers of a lost masterpiece, a secret to writing so potent it could move mountains, stir souls, and change the very fabric of reality. Young Thomas Ashton, a writer himself, though a struggling one, had heard these whispers. He devoured Silas's early works, mesmerized by their raw power and lyrical beauty. He yearned to capture that magic, that elusive something that made words dance and sing. So he'd sought out Silas, braving the treacherous climb to the cliff-top cottage, hoping to glean some wisdom from the reclusive master. He found Silas not hunched over a typewriter as he'd imagined, but tending a small, overgrown garden. The air was thick with the scent of salt and damp earth, and the only sound was the relentless crashing of waves against the rocks below. "Mr. Blackwood?" Thomas asked hesitantly, his voice barely audible above the roar of the sea. Silas straightened up, his movements surprisingly spry for a man of his age. He turned, his faded blue eyes scrutinizing Thomas with an intensity that made the young writer's heart pound. "Who's asking?" he rasped, his voice rough as sandpaper. "Thomas Ashton. I'm a writer. I've read your work," Thomas stammered, feeling suddenly foolish. A flicker of something, amusement perhaps or disdain, crossed Silas's face. "A writer, eh? Another one chasing the dragon, eh?" "I just wanted to talk to you about your writing," Thomas persisted. "I admire your work so much. I want to learn." Silas chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Learn? What's there to learn? You either have it or you don't. But your early work, it was so powerful. What's the secret?" Thomas pleaded. Silas looked out at the sea, his gaze distant. "The secret, young man, is not something you can learn. It's not a formula or a trick. It's something else." "What is it?" Thomas pressed. Silas turned back to him, his eyes piercing. "It's the willingness to bleed." Thomas frowned, confused. "Bleed?" "Yes, bleed. To pour your heart and soul onto the page. To expose your deepest fears, your darkest secrets, your rawest emotions. To write with such honesty, such vulnerability, that it feels like you're tearing a piece of yourself away." Thomas swallowed hard. "But that's terrifying." "Of course it's terrifying," Silas said. "That's why so few writers truly achieve greatness. They're afraid to bleed. They're afraid to show the world who they really are." "But what if no one cares?" Thomas asked. "What if you pour your heart out and no one reads it?" Silas shrugged. "Then you bleed for yourself. You write because you have to, because it's a fire inside you that won't be extinguished. You write because it's the only way you know how to breathe." He gestured towards the overgrown garden. "Look at this garden. It's a mess, isn't it? But it's mine. I planted every seed. I nurtured every plant. And even though no one else sees it, it's beautiful to me. So the secret is honesty." Thomas asked. "Honesty is part of it," Silas said. "But it's more than that. It's about connection. Connecting with your own soul, connecting with the reader's soul. It's about creating something that resonates, something that touches a nerve, something that makes people feel less alone." "How do you do that?" Thomas asked. Silas smiled, a rare and fleeting expression. "You listen. You listen to the whispers of your heart, the murmurings of your soul. You listen to the stories that are waiting to be told. And then you write." He turned and walked towards the cottage, leaving Thomas standing alone on the cliff, the roar of the sea echoing in his ears. He felt a strange mix of excitement and trepidation. He knew that Silas had given him something precious, something that could change his writing forever. But he also knew that it wouldn't be easy. It would require courage, vulnerability, and a willingness to bleed. Thomas spent the next few weeks wrestling with Silas's words. He tried to write, but the words felt hollow, lifeless. He was so afraid of exposing himself, of revealing his insecurities and fears, that he couldn't bring himself to write anything meaningful. One day he was walking along the beach, watching the waves crash against the shore, when he saw a group of children playing. They were building a sandcastle, their faces filled with joy and concentration. He watched them for a long time, mesmerized by their innocence and creativity. Suddenly it dawned on him. He'd been so focused on writing something profound, something important, that he'd forgotten the simple joy of storytelling. He'd forgotten the magic of creating something out of nothing. He went back to his writing desk, not with the intention of writing a masterpiece, but simply to tell a story. He wrote about the children on the beach, their laughter, their dreams, their sandcastle. He wrote about the sea, the sky, the wind. He wrote about the simple things that made life beautiful. And as he wrote, he felt something shift inside him. The fear began to recede, replaced by a sense of liberation. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He was simply telling a story. When he finished, he read what he'd written. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. It was real. It was him. He realized that Silas had been right. The secret wasn't about writing something profound or important. It was about writing from the heart. It was about connecting with your own soul and sharing that connection with others. He continued to write, not always perfectly, but always honestly. He wrote about his struggles, his joys, his fears, his dreams. He wrote about the world around him, the people he met, the things he saw. And slowly, gradually, his writing began to change. Became more powerful, more resonant, more alive. It began to touch people, to move them, to make them feel less alone. He never became famous. He never won any awards. But he found something far more valuable: his voice. He found the courage to bleed on the page, to share his soul with the world. And in doing so, he discovered the true secret to writing. It wasn't about fame or fortune. It was about connection, honesty, and the courage to be yourself. It was about the willingness to bleed. And in that bleeding, he found his own kind of beauty, a beauty born of vulnerability and truth. He learned that the real secret wasn't just to write, but to truly be a writer, with all the joy and pain that came with it. He understood now that writing was not just a craft, but a way of life, a journey of self-discovery, a constant exploration of the human heart. And in that journey, he found the magic he had been searching for all along. The magic wasn't in some hidden formula or secret technique, but in the simple act of putting words on a page, words that came from deep within, words that resonated with the very essence of who he was. And that, he realized, was the most powerful secret of all.